Well, thank you all. Thank you to Chris and Etta and everyone from the league, not only for convening us on this very important topic, for all the work that you're doing, registering people to vote, including new citizens, keeping everyone engaged and informed. Thank you so much. And Kathy, thank you so much for the incredible work that you and your colleagues are doing at Dorcas. Never easy, always challenging, but especially in these very troubled times. So I'll start with this. I, like many of you, I think, feel just a profound sense of anger and rage at many of the things that the administration are doing, but particularly in the immigration space. I sit on the Homeland Security Committee in the House. I'm on two committees, Homeland Security and Natural Resources. And on the Homeland Security Committee, we are very much in the trenches fighting this fight against the deportation of innocent people, the tearing apart of families, and really the rolling back of the fabric of who we are as a country. We are a country of immigrants. Unless there's somebody here in this room who's 100% native, every one of us is descended from immigrants. And our state, Rhode Island, was founded by a refugee as a place of refuge for other refugees. And so this is our identity as a country and as a state, and always has been. The cruelty that we're seeing from the administration is being driven certainly by Trump, but particularly by Stephen Miller, by Tom Holdman, and by Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, who I had the pleasure of arguing with strenuously when she was in front of our committee a few weeks ago. And to be clear, their goal, what they are doing is different from what they have said their goal is. What they have said their goal is, in whatever over-the-top language they use, is to get rid of criminals, gang members, rapists, etc. That, for the most part, is not what they have been doing, by their own data. So since the administration started 6 months ago, they have detained and or deported just under 300,000 people. Of those, more than 70%, more than 200,000, had no criminal record at all. These are mothers, grandmothers, children, people who are just trying to work and make a living and provide for their families and contribute to our economy. And it's been widely reported that a month or two ago, Stephen Miller called all of the regional heads of ICE to come to Washington in person and basically yelled at them for not deporting enough people and not meeting this artificial quota of 3,000 people a day. And one of the regional directors said, but we've seen you all say on TV that you want us to focus on criminals and on people with removal orders. And Stephen Miller, it is reported, said, no, forget about that. Go to Home Depot, go to 7-Eleven, round up whoever you can. So the goal of the administration is not to do what they say they're gonna do. Just speaking for myself personally, if all they were doing was focusing on people who have criminal records or people who have removal orders, we could quibble over whether some of those people should be removed or not, but if that's all they were gonna do, okay, I think most Americans would be okay with that, but that's not what they've been doing. Their goal is to remove immigrants from this country, period, whether they have committed any crimes or not, whether they're here legally or not, because you all are aware, there have been many, many people who've been detained who are here legally and committed no crimes. Students expressing political opinions or writing op-eds. There was a gentleman from New Hampshire who was being held at the Wyatt in Central Falls for a few months who was a legal green card holder. The only criminal record he had was, I believe, a simple possession of marijuana from 12 years ago or something like that, but otherwise had a clean record and was a legal green card holder here legally, is the point that I'm making. So what they are doing is so expansive, unnecessary, cruel, and also self-defeating. The vast majority of people who are here, who are undocumented, again, have no criminal record and are contributing and working actively. All right, so 20% of the construction industry, it is estimated, are people who are here undocumented. 30% of the hospitality industry, food and beverage and hotel workers, 40% of agricultural workers, right? This is central to our supply chain and our ability to try to keep costs down for American consumers. So what do we do about it? There's three things, three buckets to think about this in. What I call litigation, legislation, and then agitation, I guess. So let's start with litigation. There are over 300 lawsuits that have been filed against actions that the Trump administration have taken. Funding freezes to states and agencies, potentially illegal actions on immigration, you name it, birthright citizenship, et cetera, et cetera. If you look at those 300 or so lawsuits as a whole, so far, the administration has been losing more than they have been winning in court. And for the most part, and I say this for the most part, the administration has been following court orders. There was a big fear earlier in the year that Trump would just ignore the courts and say, well, courts, like, go screw, I'm gonna do whatever I want, right? I control the military, I control ICE, I'm gonna do whatever I want. For the most part, that has not happened yet. What they will do is they will do something illegal, like round up 3 airplanes of people and send them to a prison in El Salvador with no due process, no hearing. A court will say, you should not have done that, and then they don't do it again until they appeal, and then they try to get a higher court to tell them that they can. And I kind of compare it to like in Jurassic Park when they say that like the velociraptors kept trying different parts of the fence to like see where they could bust through. That's kind of the way the administration is handling these deportations, is they kind of keep testing the fence and doing things that they know are probably going to be found illegal by the courts, but maybe there's one that the courts will say, okay, you can do that, and then they found an opening, right? And that's sort of the way the administration has been handling it. And I think they're hoping that ultimately the Supreme Court will be very permissive with them. But in the meantime, they've mostly been doing what the courts have told them to do. And so we got to keep supporting these lawsuits. There's a number of good organizations that are involved in these. Democracy Forward is one, ACLU, others. But the litigation front has been very active, and I would say for the most part has been our most effective arena so far. Not perfect, like not saying that we're winning everything, but some effectiveness there. Legislation. This is our toughest one because the reality is that Democrats are not in the majority. And therefore our leverage is limited. Like people ask me all the time, like, are there like secret procedural tricks that you all could be, like, believe me, if there were, especially in the House, like we would have done it. In the House of Representatives, I mean, look, I did something that I never thought that I would do when I was elected to Congress. Like I voted to shut down the government a few months ago, knowing full well that that would mean that millions of federal employees would not get paid, people would not get their benefits, that there was a very real risk that public opinion would turn against us because shutdowns tend to be very unpopular. But we, House Democrats, with our leader Hakeem Jeffries, wanted to force a negotiation, like force the issue. And out of 215 of us, we got 214 to vote to stop funding the government to try to force a negotiation. That was unsuccessful in the Senate. We don't even really know if it would have worked if we had forced the shutdown, but like we were very much of the mind that like we have very few levers at our disposal in the House. We're gonna try to work whatever, like the few levers that we have when they come up. And the next time there's a funding deadline like that will be this fall. And I imagine there'll be a big push to try that again, and hopefully the Senate will go along with us this time. The most important thing that we can do legislatively, and I recognize that the League is a nonpartisan organization, you all have to be nonpartisan, I don't. So I would just say legislatively, the most important thing we can do is win back at least one chamber of Congress in the midterm elections. I cannot overstate the importance of this, because if we win back at least one chamber, and the House is probably more likely than the Senate, not only Will that give us much bigger negotiating leverage whenever there's a funding bill or a debt ceiling deadline or any sort of a must-pass situation? The annual defense bill, like literally the military doesn't have the authority to operate if we don't pass this bill, so that's a must-pass. Like, it will give us so many more points of leverage to do things like say, hey, we're not passing this unless you protect DACA recipients, or we're not passing this unless you help Afghan refugees, or unless you, like to force the issue. It will give us the ability to do that. But the other thing that it will give us the ability to do is do investigations where we can subpoena members of the administration, force them to testify under oath, force them to turn over documents, and really shine a light on what is going on in ways that will make them very uncomfortable and put the pressure on them. People forget that Steve Bannon, the reason he went to jail was for contempt of Congress for refusing to comply with a congressional subpoena. Like, that's how powerful that tool is if we use it aggressively when we're back in the majority. And believe me, like, I've got a list. Like, I cannot wait to subpoena Stephen Miller and Tom Holman and get these people in our committee under oath, get them to produce documents, get them to show us what's going on so that we can expose, again, whatever illegality exists. And then in the meantime, the third bucket is, for lack of a better word, agitation, right? Public opinion is hugely important here. And in the immigration space, I think the best thing that we can do, and what I try to do whenever we have a hearing or a press conference or whatnot, is elevate the specific stories of some of the people who've been caught up in all of this. So I always am telling the story of Andrew Hernandez Romero. He is the makeup artist, gay makeup artist from Venezuela, left Venezuela fleeing gang violence and harassment for his sexual orientation. He is currently locked up in that prison in El Salvador, a country that he's not from, had no criminal record. But the crazy thing about his story, the craziest thing, is that he didn't even enter the country illegally. He showed up at a port of entry outside of San Diego, asked for asylum. He tried to do it the legal way. He didn't sneak across the border. He didn't do any of that. He didn't overstay a visa. He tried to do it the right way. And while he was waiting for his hearing, they sent him to El Salvador, where he still is today. So I tell that story. I tell the story of the 4-year-old US citizen child with cancer who was deported, along with his mother, who was not a citizen but had no criminal record, had been here 10 years as a law-abiding individual in the United States. More and more of these stories are emerging. The Narcisco, I'm blanking on his last name, the guy just this past weekend, the gardener, who was beaten by ICE, who has 3 sons who are all United States Marines. Se Kim Jun, who is a gentleman in Hawaii, legal green card holder. People don't realize this, but green card holders can serve in the military. He was a U.S. combat veteran. He had served in the military in the 80s and 90s, was shot twice, Purple Heart runner, shot twice in Panama. Came back, and like a lot of veterans, had some mental health challenges and substance use challenges, convicted of some drug offenses, but now is being shipped to South Korea, potentially, a country that he hasn't lived in since he was 7 years old. This is as a combat veteran who has taken 2 bullets for our country. And so elevating these stories, and if we continue to elevate these stories, public opinion turns, that helps us in the midterms. It also helps put pressure on the Trump administration in the short term. In just the last few weeks, for the first time since the beginning of the year, Trump's polling is underwater on immigration. It's always been his strongest polling issue. It was his strongest polling issue during the campaign. It was his strongest polling issue in the first 6 months of the administration. That has now begun to flip. You have right-adjacent talking heads like Joe Rogan, who has now several times on his show said they're going too far with this deportation stuff. Dave Portnoy, the Barstool Sports guy, same thing. Like, these guys, like, their influencers are starting to realize that this is a problem. And so we gotta keep that public pressure on as well. So I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Like, this is not, I wish I could come here and say, here's the silver bullet and everything's gonna be fine tomorrow. Like, no, we are in a multi-front fight against the Stephen Millers and the Tom Holmans and the Kristi Noems. We're not gonna win every battle. We're not gonna be able to save every person. but we're gonna fight this fight on every front. We're gonna fight it in the courts, we're gonna fight it legislatively, we're gonna fight it in the arena of public opinion, and we're gonna do everything we can to stand up for the values that our country and our state were founded on. So, I'll stop there.
And I don't usually speak in public, but I just want to say I'm really pissed off. And I think we, Democrats in particular, need to be making a lot more noise. We need to be a lot, you know this, we need to be a lot better organized on the highest level and on the lowest levels. But we need some leadership here. I think the people are ready. Somehow the leadership is lacking for us to make it happen.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you can do in Washington, but you know, when you have a town, you know, I mean, Trump, even when he wasn't president, was around the country and had 100,000 people at a town hall. Why aren't we doing that?
Yeah.
Why aren't you four guys? But, you know, I mean, if you call it, I think the people will come.
Yeah.
But we need to raise up the energy level of this whole thing.
Yeah. Well, let me just say, first of all, no, I appreciate you saying that. Let me just say, first of all, I am always open to ideas. Like, if there are other things that you think I should be doing personally or that Democrats in Washington should be doing, give me ideas, let me know, I will take those back. I mean, I will just tell you what we have been doing is, you know, in every hearing, being vocal. We've got a lot of members who have been going and doing oversight visits at ICE detention centers, including my colleague on the Homeland Security, LaMonica MacGyver. And by the way, if those of you who, you know, if you're inclined to make small donations from time to time, donate to her right now, because her campaign account is also her legal defense fund, because they're trying to lock her up for conducting her congressional oversight. But we've got members going to ICE detention centers, holding town halls, not only in our own districts, but in Republican districts to try to force the issue there. But I will just say, and again, I can't speak for the Senate. Our senators, Jack and Sheldon, voted the right way on this, in my opinion. Not all of their colleagues did, unfortunately, but in the House, you know, we don't have a lot of levers in the House, but one lever we do have is government funding, and we tried to do that in the spring. We will most likely try that again in the fall. But by all means, if there are other ideas for other things we should be doing, let us know. Yeah.
A naturalized citizen is, sorry, becoming a naturalized person means becoming a citizen. Is that right?
Yes.
So is there a way of, I know there are a lot of categories of people, but is there a way of saying approximately how long someone takes to become a citizen? And then do you have data on, from that number, how many people register to vote or not?
So, so it takes 5 years. Someone who's been in this country as an immigrant for 5 years before they can apply to become a naturalized citizen. There is a cost involved, so sometimes the cost is a barrier. There is a fee waiver and all kinds of things, but it can get expensive. So as I said, in Rhode Island, more than half of the immigrants are naturalized already. And so there's only about 23,000 right now who are eligible to be naturalized. So we've done a good job of trying to get those who are eligible to naturalize. The League of Women Voters, I understand 90+%. So they, as every naturalization ceremony in Johnston, which is where they happen in Rhode Island, they're there to register voters. So the League of Women Voters in Rhode Island is doing an amazing job registering. Immigrants want to vote. That is one of the reasons that they naturalize. Because often they're coming from countries where they don't have the right to vote, or they don't have a democracy, or so they do believe in civic engagement. Most of the clients we work with, as we're teaching them civics, and they really do. They're excited about the idea.
So Rhode Island has numbers of who is registered as a citizen and who is not.
Correct.
The immigrants who are not.
Yeah. So as I showed you, almost 83,000 folks in Rhode Island are naturalized and eligible to vote.
I'm curious if you could explain to us what ICE's legal authority is for operating in public is. I mean, we're hearing stories of essentially people being kidnapped, and also that bystanders who want to be helpful in some way are then getting charged with a crime of impeding when they're just looking to see if the action is being done legally?
Yeah, so it's a complicated question about sort of the legality of the way that ICE is acting. And I'll say sort of in two parts to this. One, the Biden administration used a lot of the executive tools that they had to try to facilitate making it easier for people fleeing violence and poverty to come here and to start the process of applying for citizenship. And so the executive branch has a lot of tools to facilitate that, which means that they also have a lot of tools to take those pathways away. Like TPS being a good example, right? Like, TPS was Biden using his executive authority to kind of grant these waivers to people fleeing certain countries. The flip side of that is that then the current administration has the legal authority to take that away. However, the law is also very clear that everyone in this country, including people who are not citizens, including people who are undocumented, everyone in this country has the right to due process. And that is one of the, I believe, illegal stances that the administration has taken, is that they have basically started trying to lock people up and deport people without real due process. And so that is the focus of a lot of the lawsuits that I mentioned earlier. And so, using as an example, the 3 airplanes of people who were sent to the prison in El Salvador, including Andrew Romero and Kilmar Garcia and some other high-profile cases, they did that. It was illegal. A judge said, you cannot do that again without at least giving people a hearing. And so they haven't yet, right? They're appealing, and of course they want to resume doing that, but they haven't. And so it really varies. Like, they will do things that there are certain things that they have legal authority to do, but then there are others where they are really stretching or violating the bounds of their legal authority, waiting for a court to tell them no, and then they'll try something else, and then they'll try something else. So it's a complicated answer to a simple question, but it really depends on what the action is.
Just a follow-up. If I showed up in this room and started hauling all of us away, what would be the legal basis that they would be asserting to pick people up and put us in their van?
So they would, again, I'm not a lawyer, but in my opinion, they would not have a legal authority to do that. They might try to claim, well, you're impeding our response, you're impeding ICE as ICE is trying to carry out its duty to remove people who are here with removal orders, remove people here illegally, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think it would stand up in court. But again, they will try to do things until a court tells them to stop. So it depends on the situation.
Over here.
Representative Magazine as well as the other speaker. I'm interested in knowing how closely you work together with the.
Can you give them a microphone?
I'll repeat the question. I'll repeat.
Because especially on this issue, I'm sure that he's also very much involved, because you had mentioned, working with our senators, but
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much
Yeah, I
you
work.
collaborate and
Yeah.
those types of things.
The question is about the collaboration with Congressman Amo, and yeah, he and I are partners in the House. We represent Rhode Island together. We work very closely. He is very good on these issues as well. And of course, he, as the son of immigrants in Rhode Island, has, I think, a very compelling personal story to tell as well. So, yes. And one other thing that I'll just note is that all of us in the delegation, me, Jack, Sheldon, and Gabe, we all have full-time caseworkers in our office, including each of us has at least one full-time immigration specialist in our office. So, again, we're not lawyers, but we can help connect people with legal resources. We can help connect people, be sort of a go-between with the State Department and others to sort of check on the progress of their visas or their applications for citizenship. So we've been assisting in that way, not just in the macro stuff, but in the micro as well. And I don't know if you want to talk more about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, and our staff work with all 4 of their offices very closely with that kind of thing, individual cases and those kinds of things.
Questions for you?
I'm wondering, what
what you're doing, you as the Congress are doing about these incredible people being arrested by masked people without uniforms.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't there have to be an investigation and they don't
Absolutely.
present, so what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the question is, what is being done by Congress to investigate cases of ICE snatching people off the streets and locking them up and so forth? So Congress has oversight responsibility of the federal branch, or the federal government, the executive branch. And that gives us the right, for example, to go to detention centers, to be asked to be admitted to detention centers, to ask to see and speak with people who are being detained there. And so particularly in the places around the country that are sort of in the hot spots, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, there's been a lot of that. Members going directly to get into the centers and see what's going on. That being said, the strongest tools that Congress has are tools that can only be authorized by the majority of the Congress, which with the Republicans in charge, they will not let us do. So the ability to issue subpoenas for documentation, for example, and compel ICE or the Department of Homeland Security to give us documents about a certain case. That is something Congress has the power to do, but I as an individual member can't do that. It takes a vote of the full Homeland Security Committee, and the Republicans right now won't let us do that. So there are certain narrow rights that we have as individual members to conduct oversight, but the real power to conduct oversight comes when we're in the majority and we can issue subpoenas and call people in and that sort of thing. The other thing I'd say is when we're in the majority, we can also pass budgets with strings attached and say, okay, Department of Homeland Security, your budget is X billion dollars this year, but you cannot use this funding to deport people without due process. You cannot use this funding to have an ICE officer go out without identification like most police officers have. Like, we can use the budget to put parameters on how ICE can act, but obviously, again, we can only do that when we're in the majority. We're not able to do that with Republicans in charge. The last thing I'd say is this. One of the challenges is, it's not like ICE calls us and tells us when they've picked someone up. So a lot of times, we don't learn about it until we see it in the media or hear about it secondhand. I had somebody call me a couple of months ago, and again, there hasn't been as much ICE activity in Rhode Island as in other places, but there has been some. And I had somebody call me a few months ago and say, this is somebody who lives in Providence, and said, hey, I just saw what looked like ICE come and pick somebody up off the sidewalk in front of Tortilla Flats in a restaurant in Providence. And so right away, I called my staff, we called the ICE office, we said, hey, did you all just pick someone up in Providence by Tortilla Flats? And they said, well, we can't tell you anything unless you give us like a signed letter from the individual or their family. And we were like, well, we don't know who they are, so we can't go get a letter. And they were like, well, tough shit, right? And so again, our ability as individual members is limited, but when we are in the majority, our ability to crack down on this kind of thing will be much expanded.
Can I just follow up, because I know there have been shadow dockets where there is
Oh,
such
yeah.
a thing as a shadow investigation. And I
Yeah.
know that Jeffries, and several people have happened, and I wonder why that isn't being done.
Oh, it is. So the question, so you can do what's called shadow hearings, where instead of having a official committee hearing, like an official Homeland Security hearing, and by the way, the Republicans have been doing very few official hearings because they don't want us asking questions. So on Homeland Security, we haven't had a full committee hearing since Kristi Noem came in, and that was like 2 months ago. We can do what's called a shadow hearing, where Democrats only do our own little kind of fake hearing, and we can bring in witnesses, and we can bring in the press, and we can say things and ask questions. We are doing that, so I'm organizing one on this topic for right after the 4th of July. Pramila Jayapal, who's on the Judiciary Committee, which is another committee that has jurisdiction over immigration, she did one, I think last week, also on this same topic. The difference though is that these are unofficial hearings. We're not allowed to do subpoenas. We're not allowed to compel the administration to come in and testify before us in a shadow hearing. it's basically a way for us to get press attention, and so we are doing that, but
More of it.
it doesn't have the same kind of teeth. And so again, like I'm working right now with Delia Ramirez, who's a colleague of mine on the Homeland Security from Chicago, who is the child of two undocumented parents herself. We're going to be having a shadow hearing on this topic that she and I are organizing for right after the 4th. So we are doing it. I want to give someone else a chance. Yeah.
I thought I had read just recently that they were limiting the oversight visits to the ICE detention centers.
Yeah. So right. So this kind of gets back to like the velociraptor trying the fence, and like they will try different arguments until a court tells them they can't. So there's actually a law that says that if a member of Congress presents themselves at an ICE detention facility, they have to be allowed in to do an inspection. So that's actually a law that was passed a couple of years ago. So that law is on the books, but what they're trying to basically do is say, yes, okay, we'll honor that, but like you've got to make an appointment, or you've got to like give us 48 hours notice, and they will claim that it's like for the safety of the inmates or like whatever. But like, again, like what we're going to have to do now is go to get a judge to be like, no, you can't require 48 hours notice. The law doesn't. So you see what I mean? Like they're not. They are even this administration, which bends the law to like a maximum degree. Even they know that they can't just say no, we're not going to let you in anymore. But they're trying to like find little ways to limit us. But that's just part of the back and forth. But members are still committed to going, and I can tell you, I mean, they're filing bogus criminal charges against LaMonica McIver to try to scare us out of doing our oversight, and they're not going to scare us from doing that. Like quite the opposite. Ma'am.
Congressman, I want to start by saying I'm very, very supportive and impressed by what you're doing for Rhode Island. I want to bring up an issue. I want to hear from you directly about that vote to support ICE.
I haven't voted to support ICE. I think what you're talking about is there was this is one of the things that happens when the other party is in charge, is they put up stuff that you have to vote on that is not written the way you would have written it. There was a resolution a couple weeks ago that was about the attack in Boulder, Colorado, where a number of mostly elderly people outside of a Jewish community center were attacked by a guy with Molotov cocktails who tried to burn them to death. And there was a resolution basically condemning that attack, condemning anti-Semitism, and virtually everything in the resolution was stuff that everybody here I think would agree with. And then there was a line toward the end thanking first responders, thanking police, including ICE, because the person who committed the attack was an immigrant who was here illegally because he had overstayed a visa. And so like, is that the way I would have written it? No. But, on the other hand, this is one of those gotchas where they're going to say, well, if he voted no, then he's voting against condemning the attack, he's voting against condemning anti-Semitism, he supports the terrorists, like blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, like, it's not the way I would have written it. It's a lose-lose vote either way. What I'm focused on is the stuff that actually does have an impact on the illegal actions that the administration is taking, doing the oversight, fighting whenever we can with this government funding, whatever else with our legislative levers, fighting in the courts, fighting in the court of public opinion. But it's a fair question. So
Well, thank you, sir. I really wanted to hear your answer, and that reassures me.
Yeah.
Excuse me, wasn't there two resolutions, 481 and 488?
Yeah, I
481
voted
didn't
for-
have any of that,
I voted
and
for-
488 did.
I voted for the other one too.
Yeah.
But again, like it doesn't, I mean, however many resolutions there were, doesn't change the fact that a no vote would have given Republicans an opening to say Democrats voted against condemning anti-Semitism, Democrats voted against condemning the attack.
Katie
And so-
Bono did not vote for the second one.
Yeah, understood. Like something like 80 Democrats did. It's a lose-lose either way, but ultimately it's a symbolic resolution. What really matters, I think, is actually doing the work of exposing the illegality of the administration and fighting back. And I've been very vocal in doing that. I mean, you all have seen, like, I've been very vocal in calling out the abuses of this administration and the way that they've been using ICE. Yes, ma'am, and then I'll come back over to this side, in the blue. Oh,
Right.
sorry.
I kind of want to just shift, if only momentarily, to the agitation part of this. And that is, I wonder, since the agitation has largely been on a grassroots level, which has a lot of power in one way, the question that you asked about leadership, is there a way, if not getting some leadership action from you and your colleagues, but a way to publicize what's being done grassroots on a broader scale that would sort of make a link between?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I am very happy to participate in rallies, events, etc. Like I have been doing that. I know some, Gabe and Jack and Sheldon have also. I'll continue to do that, and I want to encourage that. But I think that we all have a role to play. I try to raise the profile of this issue with my work in the Homeland Security Committee, with my posts on social media, where I post and talk about this a lot, and we've been focused a lot on growing our social media channels, press releases, press conferences. We're going to do the shadow hearing, as I said. As far as things like rallies go, I'm happy to participate in those, and I think that's helpful. But I just remind everyone, the big ones that were happening 8 years ago, like the women's marches and stuff like that, it's not like those were organized by members of Congress. Grassroots movements have to be grassroots, but that doesn't preclude the fact that just like back then, those of us who were in elected office showed up, spoke, showed support, and will continue to do that this time too.
Yes, it didn't mean leadership as in you step in and plan the rallies, you broadly those in their position, but rather you have the ability to contact a lot of people.
Yeah.
And that perhaps, the links that are growing between these different grassroots organizations can reach.
You mean we can help publicize what's happening and that's the thing? Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
No, that's good. Yeah, absolutely. Sir.
One more question.
We need this lady to ask a question.
So, Representative, there are a lot of people who are tolerating the illegalities of the administration around immigration for a specific reason, and that is, in my opinion, that Trump and his group have portrayed the Biden administration as having completely opened the borders and allowed in a flood of refugees, and there are a lot of people who still believe that and are willing to look the other way because they see it as a bigger problem.
Yes.
So here's my problem. My question is really more political than legal. How true do you think that accusation is? If it's true, what are the Democrats nationally doing in terms of proposed changes to policy that would prevent that from happening in the future? And if it's not true, what are they doing about getting the message out to convince more people that it's not true and we ought to stand up more against what they're doing?
So yes and no. So the question is, to what extent is the anti-immigrant backlash that we're seeing now and the permissiveness of what Trump is doing connected to a perception that President Biden was too loose with the border, and was he too loose or not too loose? So that was a short question, but with a lot of different parts to it. I'll just offer my own view very quickly. So I'd say multiple things can be true. It is true that President Biden, his policies were more permissive, particularly on people claiming asylum at the southern border, than probably any other president. And if you just look at the numbers, the number of people who came into the country who were undocumented was significantly higher under President Biden than on any other 4-year period. That doesn't mean that the people who were coming in, that they were all criminals, terrorists, et cetera. We know that is not the case. Yes, when you have millions of people come in over a 4-year period, are there going to be some bad actors here or there? Of course, but the vast majority of people who are coming are people who are fleeing poverty, fleeing violence, fleeing persecution, looking to take advantage of our strong economy to get a job and survive and maybe send a little money to their family members. That is the overwhelming majority. The other thing is, under the law, people are entitled to claim asylum and to ask for a hearing and say, hey, I'm fleeing a terrible situation, I deserve to be let in, can I at least have a hearing? Part of the problem of how we got here is that there is such a backlog of cases for asylum waiting to be heard before an immigration judge that it takes years and years for people to have their case heard. And so when we take back the majority, I think one of the tangible things that we can do to help fix this situation is hire a bunch more judges. And it is quite possible that in many cases the judges will say, sorry, you don't have a valid asylum claim, you gotta go. But in other cases, the judge will say, yes, you do have a valid claim. But clearing through that backlog will at least get most of the people who are here, get their status resolved one way or another, and lead to a much more orderly system. I do think that we as Democrats have to acknowledge that we need an immigration system that is orderly and safe. And that what happened under the last administration, as well as intention as it was not always orderly and was not always safe for the migrants themselves, to say nothing of others. And so we need to learn from that, and we need to do better next time. Part of that includes things like resources for judges and things like making it easier for people to initiate their asylum claims when they're still in their home countries before they actually get to the United States, to help streamline things before they actually come. Like there are common sense things that we can do to have a better system next time, but none of that excuses the horrible way in which immigrants, both undocumented and not, are being treated under the current administration. None of that excuses that. And none of that changes the fact that under our Constitution, everyone who is within the borders of the United States, whether they are a citizen or not, is entitled to due process. That is constitutional. That is, without question, the Trump administration is going to try to fight it, but that has always been the case. So, yes, look, when we're back in charge on our side, we're going to have to learn from the experiences of the last administration and do it better next time. But in the meantime, a lot of innocent people are being caught up in terrible situations, and we have to fight back as hard as we can. So, with that, thank you, everybody.